I'm Anna. Welcome to Pilates. So today we're going to do kind of a more hip mobility focused routine. We'll still do regular Pilates, so abs and shoulders and everything else, glutes, but a little more focused on hips. So if you have a foam roller and a yoga block, I'll give you some substitutes if you don't. Foam roller we'll use kind of for balancing for a little feedback. So you could use a chair. You could also use a wall, totally fine. If you have a pole, you could use that as a substitute as well. Yoga block, if you don't have one, no worries. We're gonna use it for a little standing thing. And then you can totally sub in a stability ball for any of the inner thigh stuff that we'll do. So, also a foam pad. So if you have like one of those cushions that's a little bit wider, if you're going really wild, you could use like a Bose or stability cushion, but maybe see what the exercise is first. So obviously you don't have to do everything. So if something's not really feeling groovy, feel free to opt out or take a modified version that you know works for you. And I'll try to give some levels to kind of option up and down as we go. So we'll start with a little standing warm up here since it's raining cats and dogs and kind of chilly. So focusing on hip mobility, we're going to start with the twist. So what I like about the spinal rotation, we'll take it, maybe a little bit slower today. We're rotating all of the joints. So it's one of the best ways to warm up. If you are a runner or a cyclist, or you're going to go do kind of a more intense workout and you only have a couple minutes to warm up, rotation is a really nice one. Gives us some good feedback too. So as I rotate, I'm kind of making sure every joint is moving. And it gives us some good info if we have a place that's a little stiffer, especially for when we're moving, right? Gravity is kind of pushing on us and then we're pushing back on gravity when we walk and move through the world. And so if there's a place where we're really stiff, that tends to be where maybe the kinks, and then we'll have some kind of dysfunctional mechanics come from that. Give us some good feedback here. Then bring your feet a little closer. Let's just take a couple shoulder rolls. Just like, ooh, are they moving? Hopefully we want to feel those shoulder blades kind of sliding and gliding on the ribs. And then just take a little reverse. Right, and we have all of this access for breath in the back and the side of the rib cage. So the more mobility we have fascially, we usually have a little bit easier time breathing in those areas. So it's a really nice place to find a little bit of movement here. Okay, and we'll stand. So we'll start a little bit wider. Really push through your heels so you feel your outer hip. We're going to sweep an arm up and we're just going to take a side bend and then come back up to center. So like a single breath side bend. What I want you to notice is the power in the leg that's the opposite way we're bending. If I'm going to the left, I'm really pushing through that right leg, activating through that heel, glute, outer hip, and then same on the opposite side. And we'll just do this one more time, pushing through, coming back up, and then last one. And then we'll do a little protraction, retraction stretch. So clasping the hands. I can bend my knees if I want. I'm going to show a straight legs first. So my shoulders are neutral when I start. As I press away, I'm going to try to push my upper back. So the space between my shoulder blades gets a little bit wider as I push my wrists away. And then I'm going to come to neutral. So I'm going to press my arms to the ceiling and push my feet into the ground. I get like a nice little stretch between ribs and hips. So it's like if you could lift your shirt, that's kind of what you want to think of doing. And then here now, I'm going to pull my shoulder blades together as I lift my sternum. And you can think of like, if you're going to pull something down, right? Like you're doing a lat pull, find your lats, engage a bit here. And let's do this like 3 more times. Move at your own pace. Don't feel like you have to move as snail slow as me. Here's a little flexion. So what I want you to notice in this is that flexion and extension, here's extension, come with movement with our shoulder blades, which is pretty cool. So if I'm rounded, it's really hard to find a back bend, right? So we'll think about that when we're on the ground. Really big stretch here. And then a push. And we'll just do one more. And then just breathing normally for the warm up. We don't need to do any kind of overwrought, complicated breathing. But just notice that you are breathing. And talk to your pets and your plants. Okay, and then we're gonna do a couple of roll downs. So standing with the feet about hip distance or together for a little bit more challenge. See if you can feel your feet really even through the sole of the foot. So maybe a little test. Where's my weight from front to back and side to side? Kind of do a little check here. When you feel pretty even, that means your stack is pretty good. So I've got a Good stack. I'm gonna nod my chin. Hands can be draping or on the body. Now, if my weight shifts, I've become a little unengaged in the legs. So I'm gonna keep my weight even, drape my spine down. It's okay if the knees bend. At the bottom, do a little check. Did I kind of fall behind? We're pretty smart at countering. So as I roll down, sorry, and you can roll back up again, we'll do this about 3 times. So just rolling down, tucking the chin, getting a little distracted by my speech making. we'll roll up here. So one of the cool things about our bodies is we'll figure out a way to decrease effort. So it's a lot easier for me to shift my hips back and my head forward and then lock my knees. And it's like, all right, cool. I don't have to do any muscular work in my legs to do that roll up. So we want to see if we can keep the activation of the legs, inner thighs, outer hips. You're actually going to get more rotation in your pelvis and then roll it all the way up. All right, so now if you have your foam roller, this can be a really helpful tool. If you don't have a pole, if not, no worries. You can totally do just like one hand on the front of your hip and one hand on the back of your hip. So find your hip bones. You're gonna stay in your pelvis here for this motion. I'm gonna show with the foam roller. I'm gonna hold it low. So if your shoulders are a little tight, this could be harder. And so that's where you could just do hands front and back of the pelvis. I wanna have my back of my head and my shoulder blades and my tailbone against the roller. So I'm standing up pretty straight. So I'm only hinging from my hip. So here's that nice hip crease. This is hip disassociation, right? So my thigh and my hip should move separately. My brain's in my pelvis. My pelvis is gonna move. And I only get to go as far forward as I don't start to round away from my roller. And then once I've gone as far as I can, I'm gonna push through my feet. So think of pushing through your heels and then let your pelvis bring you back up. So this is the source of movement. We'll try this a couple times here, where pelvis is allowing for motion, your sits bones open, core's on, really 3-dimensional and engaging and supporting the spine. Keep it as small as you need. Try a couple more like this. I just wanna show kind of without the roller with my hands. So if I go a certain distance and then my ribs keep going, I get this kind of flexion through my spine. That's when we tend to have back pain and other problems. So we want to find that my trunk stays really vertical and getting this nice motion from the hip joint, right? Same kind of motion as your squat. So that's one direction of our hip mobility is, can I disassociate thighs and pelvis, which is really important to restore neutral in our hips. Part of what we do in Pilates, right, is train to restore that postural balance. So then our next range of motion piece is going to be a little side to side. So you can use your roller for balance. You can also use a wall. And I'm just going to do a little cross, and I'll show with the roller first. I'm going to do a little sweep out and a little cross. So I'll make sure you guys can see here. You can totally have your roller in front to be a little bit more balanced. And we're just seeing, okay, what's my range? Gentle. It's a little bit of a swing, but a little bit slower, so not too violent. What's my range in reaching out to the side and going across? So this is also important. The more neutral we can be, we'll pause here, shake it out for a moment and try the other side. You can adjust your roller, or right, if this feels pretty groovy, move my little speaker cord here. You can do it balancing. Suddenly, ooh, more excitement on the supporting leg. Hips are level. I'm keeping my torso really quiet. So same idea, but now instead of my legs being fixed and my pelvis moving, which we just did with the flat back, now it's my pelvis is fixed and my leg is moving. So same, but different. You can use the roller or a wall. Try a little sweep front to back. Nice and easy, just a little swing. And I've got my foot flexed. And what I'm noticing is I've got this crease at the front of my hip joint, like I just found here. And it's kind of where my swimsuit line would be, that's reaching behind me. Really good rule of thumb just to make things a little easier. We'll try a couple on the other side. No hands for bonus. When I'm moving forward, right, usually something in the front of my body is working concentrically. When I'm moving backwards, something is working concentrically. So my glute's working more than my hip flexor to try to bring my leg behind me. And now my hip flexor is having to work a little bit more in that concentric direction. So something to think about. Where's the direction of movement can help you target what you want to fire. So now if you want to add your block, last little well, 2 more standing excitement exercises. You're gonna bring your yoga block down to the mat. Feel free to grab your foam roller, chair, wall. You're gonna step 1 foot onto your yoga block. Part of this is it's a little easier to not cheat. So a lot of times, again, our body's super smart where we go, ooh, that was 100% effort. We're gonna dial it down to where it's 20% effort or less. And so usually when we reach our leg out to the side, not always, we're like, this is a lot easier. I'm counterbalancing. So it's less muscular work because I'm just using load. I'm gonna see if I can keep my spine really straight. I have to work my inner thigh and my outer hip a little more on my supporting leg. So you should feel pretty centered through that foot. And then here's that swimsuit line. Can I reach that leg out and back in? So it's a pretty small movement. It's pretty low. I'll show from the side here. We're gonna take a couple of those reaches. So here's that crease, out and in. And my leg's parallel, right? So it's even gonna be smaller. But here's that outer hip support. So we're working the same hip that's actually supporting us as we do these. And then what I will say is if we're recovering from, we're gonna take a couple more of these, we'll get them a little spicy. So we're gonna do this on the mat. So this is the work that we wanna feel in our hips when we're lying on our side. Let's try some circles here. So we're gonna circle in front, to the side, and back. And I'll show from the side as well. Let's go for like 6 in one direction, then we'll reverse it. Now I'm having to adjust my supporting leg the entire time. So supporting leg's having to work really hard. Depending on where you feel the least stable, let's reverse those now. So go back to front. You might find it's actually calf or ankle stability. You wanna make sure that hip is on. So outer hip and inner thigh always wanna be kind of your first piece, right? Think proximal, so closest to your center, and then distal. So we want this to be really stable. And then we kind of distill down to the end. Got 3 more like this. Hopefully you're starting to feel some work. The yoga block makes it harder. So if you want a little more support for the foot, take a little rest, shake it out. We'll take a calf stretch here, just a quickie. Just make sure your foot's nice and parallel. So if you look back at it, toes are forward. If you have an unstable surface, it's more work, right? So if you want to make it easier, try like a wood floor. More excitement would be the Bosu. So if you're going to throw the Bosu in for this one, it's like turning it up a notch. All right, so second side here. And we'll start with just those reaches. So find that crease, that swimsuit crease, right? I'm nice and tall, my torso is really stacked. It's like I've got a suspender pulling me up on that standing leg. And I think a good thing to notice is if you breathe normally and then suddenly you start balancing and you hold your breath. So take a couple exhales, see if you can find like a normal kind of conversation level of breath while you balance so that nervous system doesn't go, oh no, panic, we're balancing, shut everything off. Using a prop is really awesome for support. We'll make those circles now. So we're gonna circle front to back. We'll do about 6 of these. And the reason is it gives your body some feedback about where you are in space. So if you're not sure if you're totally square or not, maybe have that roller in front of you, hold onto the wall, facing the wall. Let's reverse these circles here. It's really good. It's also good for if you're building strength in a position that's maybe harder for a certain muscle. If you know it's a little weaker, you're recovering from an injury, it lets your nervous system trust the movement. So props can be really great. So it's not a bad thing if we find, oh my gosh, I'm totally gripping and doing everything really zany when I don't have my prop. Add a little support. It's really good for the brain and you'll build those neurons. So we'll set these guys off to the side for a moment. Okay, so we have lots of planes of hip movement and hip stability. Get this guy out of the way here. So we'll come down to the mat. So if you want to pad your knees, feel free to fold the mat or grab a kneeling pad. We're gonna come to hands and knees. So a little spinal movement, since we just did a lot of hip business. Try a couple of cat-cows and initiate it from your pelvis. Look at this guy, a little tuck so we can see. So core, I'm pushing out of my arms. Core is gonna scoop in as I gaze towards my inner thighs. And then I'm allowing my sits bones to open, but my core stays on. So really focusing more on pelvis initiating. And you can get pretty detailed with this, right? In Pilates, we can kind of overthink and analyze everything. Do you feel, really good for building proprioception and interoception, do you feel your low back trying to lead the motion, or do you feel your pelvis trying to lead the motion? So if you can take your brain into the hips being the initiator, that can also help with if low back tends to do a little bit more than it needs to, like it kind of works out on its own agency versus pelvis leading, because your low back's connected. So it's going to follow, but we don't want it to always lead. Let's just do one more like this here. And then we'll do a little hip mobilizer. So I'm going to take my right leg. I'm going to bring it in towards my right elbow tricep. And then I'm going to try the other side. So I'm just going to see if I can tap. And a couple of things you can do as you alternate this tap. Arms are definitely pushing out of the ground pretty strongly here. The other piece that's going on is my supporting hip is helping. So if my supporting hip kind of sinks, I have a lot less space. So I'm really kind of SOL. If I can push this hip in, it almost gives me more height and a little more core activation. And so once we've done a couple of those, let's reset and we'll do a couple bird dog with or without your arms. So feel kind of where your shoulders feel in terms of stability today. Watch elbows for hyperextending. We can either just reach out or we can add the arm. And I would say for today, if you feel like your bird dog is going to be here, then keep both hands down and work the hip instead, because you're still getting tons of shoulder work. And what I want you to think about, right, abs lifting up, pushing out of the ground, there's this constant isometric work that's happening, which is why it's so tricky. Is your hip flexor doing the lifting, or directionally, can you use your glute? And then as you're thinking about activating your bum, you don't need to grind down, right? There's no bracing or that'll kind of lock us out of mobility. Kind of opening the front of the hip, like a string is just lifting your glute up. The other thing you can think about is my lumbar spine giving way? So can I find my core lifting as my glute also lifts the leg? And we've done about 500 of those, so we'll rest for a moment. We're gonna bring, I'll show the left leg first, so you can start with left leg. We're gonna try to bring that left foot to the outside of the left hand. Pretty tight. If you need to swing the leg around in order to get it towards that leg, that's totally fine. Our goal eventually is that we're pushing out of the arms, that we can lift that foot and bring it back. And so I'm gonna have you alternate sides here. Same theory, the supporting hip in my shoulders, really pushing so that I can lift in place and then come back down. And I'm doing just as much work, right? Here's your drag option. If your hip isn't quite ready, that's okay. Goals here, and we'll alternate sides. And you'll notice that you've got maybe one side where you shift a little more. Like I find I'm a little shiftier when I try to lift my left leg. So maybe I'm gonna push a little harder with this outer hip. And I might find I have a little more weight on the hand of the direction that I'm going. So let's even that out here. So we'll just do one more each way. Give the arms a little break for a moment. And take a quick child's pose. You can reach the arms out, keep it pretty active. We'll just do like a breath cycle here, maybe walking the fingers a little further forward. And then starting to walk yourself back. Okay, so if knees are getting a little tired, we're gonna be on them just a little bit longer. Maybe pad or play with flexing or pointing your toes. For some of us, this feels better, this feels better. We're gonna play with a lift of the leg forward. If you need stability, wall chair, foam roller comes into play here. So using that outer hip that you just warmed up on your block, you're gonna bring one leg forward. Now I can use my opposite arm, and I recommend that if you feel unstable, because it helps with the core here, and then we're gonna bring the leg back. I'm gonna try the other side. So same rule applies. If I need, I can sweep. Eventually, we want the strength not only in the supporting hip. So again, we're looking for, we'll alternate sides here kind of as I yak. If I'm here, can I be here? So can I find this hip pushing in to support? And then eventually that deep psoas strength and hip flexor strength, there's where that crossed arm would have been good. And I have this nice moment where I can kind of push through my front heel just gently. And I can feel my glute and hamstring. And we want to try to connect into that to even out the pelvis to stabilize it in neutral. And just try maybe 1 or 2 more here. Back foot can be tucked or long. Got the option to cross that arm. Let's take the right leg forward and let's heel toe the foot a little bit towards the diagonal. So kind of outside the mat, but also forward. Bring your hands down. So for this one, you have kind of 2 options here. You can shift forward and you can shift back. And I'll show this from a couple angles. I'm getting like a nice little shift, a little stretch. I can also play with allowing, right? We're thinking hip mobilization today. I can allow that knee to fall out. So maybe it falls out a little bit as I shift forward and back into this. Maybe I take some butterflies. So listen to your body. If you quit breathing immediately and everything braces, maybe you're pushing it too far. So just like take it back a couple degrees. We're going for gentle trust and mobilization. And if it feels really good, right? Some of us have that flexibility already where we're like, this isn't enough. You can come down to your forearms, but I still want you to stay kind of active with moving through that supporting leg and pushing out of the arms. Once we've done a couple of those, take the same arm as your leg that's forward. You're going to take a gentle twist. So I'm going to push and rotate, and then I'm going to come back down. We're just going to do that a couple more times. So I'm going to push and rotate towards that leg. Now, does it feel like your only support is your supporting arm, or can you push through that front heel and find a little bit of support through the glutes? So really getting the hips to support you in a pretty extreme range. When you finish that last one, you can start to walk your hands back. Pull that foot in a little closer, come up to your kneeling position, and then practice that switch one more time. So you get a little extra wee, supporting hip in. Nice, then walk that foot out a little bit. I'm gonna bring my hands down. So I want it slightly further on the diagonal so that when I come down, I'll show from the side here, I don't feel too squished, but I have a little more length. And then I can play with shifting forward, shifting back. I've got 4 points of contact. So I should feel like pretty supported. And then maybe playing with that leg, coming out and in a couple times. I can kind of, this is a little bit of like, listen to the body, choose your own adventure. Maybe I come down onto the forearms. If this doesn't feel good and you stop breathing, don't come down to the forearms, stay up here. See if you can find your hips being the initiation of your shift from back to front, and your arms are just here to support. Once you've done a couple of those guys, you can start to walk that foot back in, right? Coming back up, here I'm back in my little starting position. I'm gonna bring that leg back one more time, and then sweet relief, we can come off those knees, cross your ankles, come down onto your bum. Nice, lots of knee stuff. Walk your feet out a little wider, so maybe just outside of your mat. We're gonna take a couple windshield wipers. Feel free to have your arms behind you if you find you have tighter hips, right? This is a really good option. I'm gonna let my top leg rotate out and my bottom leg rotate in. Think about it moving from that source, so from the top of your thigh, even though we see the knee moving, and then see if you can press that top leg up. So what lifts the knee? Outer hip, that same thing that you just did in your standing block. So I'm floating that leg up. Now my hip naturally is gonna roll down to the ground. And then once I've gone as far as I can, second leg follows, allow for the sits bones to open and move. So can I press this up as far as I can from my hip instead of kind of just taking my hips with me? Let that thigh move independently as long as possible and then move. And so I'll show from the front here. If this is feeling groovy, maybe you take no hands. Now what I will say is the closer your feet are, narrower and also to you, the less room you have. So it becomes a little challenging. If you have a hard time sitting up in your sits bones, investing in kind of one of those wider, either like a floor cushion, you know, yoga kind of cushion style. Yoga block is okay, it's a little small, but if you have a wider foam block, that can be really awesome because you can sit on it and then you can do the same exercise. I just find the yoga block is like a little tiny for my booty, but good option for adding that mobility. And we'll take just one more like this. All right, and then We'll come back. If you've got your block, you can throw it or your stability ball in between your thighs. And then let's play with a little half roll back here. So half roll back, great example of my thighs are staying still in space. We're adding some ab work now. So I'm gonna roll back, squeezing that block. I'm rolling my pelvis back away from my thighs, right? So my pelvis is now in like a lying down position, and then I curl back up. And you can always use your hands for a little extra support. Right here we are, just closing the nervous system chain here to give ourselves a little more feedback. What I want you to see, if you can register neutral, tailbone down. My tailbone rotates towards my heels. I curl up with my ribs first. So here's my crunch. And then I just gently pick up my pelvis. So pelvis leads, tailbone rotates forward. Nice breath in, exhaling to curl back up. If your shoulders like to lift, think of engaging your lats down a little bit. And then kind of check in, a little bit of lat engagement. Again, very small percentage. I don't want you to lock your lats, but just a little awareness if those shoulders are climbing into the ears. Let's challenge that just a little bit. So pelvis stability, bring your hands together. You're gonna roll back, maybe not your deepest. We're just gonna twist to one side, inhale and exhale, twist to the second side. And so again, I said it before, say it a million more times. We'll exhale to twist here a couple more times. Twisting and side bending, really great if you're feeling kind of compressed. Right, gravity is kind of working against us most of our lives. So the more we can twist and side bend, just general mobilization, fidgeting, really good to help access neutral pelvis, right? Access our rib cage stack and our core. And then let's roll all the way down, one vertebrae at a time. You're gonna stretch your arms overhead for a moment, take a nice little stretch. So we'll pull our feet in a little closer, kind of our classic bent leg position. Pelvis should feel pretty neutral here. So we're gonna work in a neutral first. Let's play with our arms for a moment. So I'm reaching my arms to the ceiling, my palms are facing, thumbs are towards my head. What I want you to find is, find kind of the bottom of your bra line, if you have a bra, which is a convenient tool, and or base of your shoulder blade. So armpit just below the armpit. So kind of right below your pecs here. I want you to think of reaching from here to reach your arm overhead. So this is going to allow the motion. And then when you're coming back in, think of just gently finding that moving back down a little bit. And the reason is, and I like this analogy of, if I have my shirt, I'm letting my armpits open and lift, and my shirt lifts a little bit, and then I'm gently returning, because we want to keep, again, tops of the shoulders from kind of overworking. They'll elevate once we're in elevation. They're allowed to, of course, but we don't want them to be what's bringing us down, or we end up with the shoulder in the ear kind of situation. So just checking in with that here. So mobilizing up and down a couple times. As you do this, if the rib cage pops, here's your challenge. Can you keep the core engaged, but allow for movement? If there's any big clicking, any clunky stuff, work a little slower, or maybe even isolate that arm for 1 or 2 and see where the movement gets sticky, and then go slow enough that you can move through that. So we're gonna take this into a couple crunches in neutral. So here's my pelvis, tailbone's reaching long. I might have a little space below my back depending on my structure. My arms are overhead. We're gonna keep palms facing each other instead of down. I'm gonna sweep my arms to the ceiling. As I see my fingers, I'm gonna curl up for a little crunch. Take a nice breath in, and then lower back down, let the armpits open. We'll take a couple of those. So just a nice sweep in, eyes follow, nodding the chin, exhaling to curl, and then lengthening and lower back down. So with our crunches here, you can really kind of keep an eye on what's pelvis up to, right? Neutral can be tricky. We don't necessarily come up as far, especially if you're a little shorter in the torso. I want you to imagine kind of floating ribs here. This upper part of your abs are engaging to bring you up a little bit more. So you're kind of focused here versus neck. And then see if you can keep your core on and lengthen back down, rather than feeling like we just collapse on the way down. So we'll just do a couple more. So really focused engagement through that upper core. You'll feel the weight kind of shift into that middle back. How's pelvis? A little check again here. Do we feel like we're gripping? Maybe we've gone a little too high. And then we'll lengthen back down. Okay, so we'll take that block out for a moment. Walk your feet a little wider. Let's do a little slight turnout. And we're just gonna do a nice shoulder bridge, isometric hold. So we're gonna kind of counter that flexion we were just in. We're gonna press through the heels, lift the hips. Here, I wanna keep an eye on that same kind of upper ab piece that I just found. So if I'm popping my ribs, I don't have to brace, but I just wanna soften through the upper abs. Get the glutes on, open the front of the hips here. Breathing, arms can be down or up, right? We tend to, especially in like Western culture, we sit at about 90 degrees all the time, right? We're in a chair for the most part, work, commuting, hip extension. So that tends to be the piece that we lose pretty quickly. So shoulder bridge is awesome, isometric hold. It's a great way to build strength. Once you've done one more breath here, just meld that spine all the way back down. So nice, you can walk those feet in a little closer. All right, now we're gonna come into imprint. So now I've got my slightly tilted pelvic position. I'm gonna use my obliques to draw my hips and my ribs together, right? So now my tailbone, instead of pointing towards my heels, it's slightly on the diagonal, right? I wanna smash my back. I want it to come from my hips. So try a couple of those, just prepping into this, maybe hands, fingers on hips and thumbs on your low rib. And notice, is it my back that presses down first? And your shoulders will usually pop up if that's the case. Or can I find my pelvis creating the roll? And maybe you need to actually just physically kind of go, wait, okay, where's my pelvis? Cool, my hips are moving. Can my hips be the initiator, right? And it's low core that's pulling our hips into this shape. So once I'm here, I'm gonna float one leg up to tabletop, and I'm gonna lower that leg down. And I love an exhale for this one. Maybe an inhale, hold, and an exhale if you need more support versus a single breath cycle. And we're just noticing what gives first. Is it my ribs want to pop, my low back wants to pop, my abs want to pop? Should feel that really nice crease. So even in imprint, I shouldn't feel like this is a ton of quad work, but it's like really just that thighs falling into the hip socket. If this feels good, stick with one leg to tabletop, bring your second leg to meet it. So now we're gonna just up the challenge. So maybe I still have my hands on my body. Again, tactile feedback is awesome. Can I do a toe tap without off weighting? So I'm never putting weight in that foot, but I'm just barely tapping. If I want more challenge, right, arms up or arms overhead. If you're going arms overhead, let that length happen, but your core is still supporting you. So really, really nice extra challenge. Maybe the legs tap a little bit further, right? So longer lever just means more challenge in the core. Reset as you need. We'll go for about 4 more like this. Easy breath here. What's going on with that supporting leg? And let's do 1 more each way. And then you can hug your legs into your chest. Maybe pull your knees wider and take a couple little rocks from side to side. Nice, and let's roll onto your side. If you want to use your block, the perk of the block, you can totally use it as a head pad. So that could be a nice thing to add in. We're gonna do a little bit more hip mobilization. So first we're gonna find supporting leg can be bent, one long line. So maybe use your mat to line up if that's helpful. We've got ribs and hips all pointing in the same direction, whatever's most comfortable in your neck. I'm gonna take that top leg and I'm gonna bring it to the front corner of my mat. I'm gonna turn my whole leg in from my hip here. With your hand, find that place where your swimsuit line would be. So really where that thigh falls into your hip socket. This is gonna be what lifts. So I crease here, I float up, hold for a moment, and I lower back down. And we're gonna say these are like relatively slow and controlled. Again, notice when control means like super tension brace, or when it just means, okay, like a little mental focus in that one spot. So we kind of want to figure out how can we keep everything else in the body relatively lazy and still in that sense. So, not so lazy that everything's falling around, but detensioning, which is an important thing because we have a lot of stress in our lives. And we'll just do 1 more like this. How's the breath? How's the neck? Right, a little bit of core to support the low back. Then you can bend that top leg. We're going like gentle clamshell. So my knees are well below my hips. Check your pelvis, easy to tuck here. So find that hip crease. Is there one? So it's a good way to kind of check in. Float that leg up and down a couple of times, and I'm keeping it bent. So here's your same motion you did standing, right? Exactly the same thing. You can feel where there's actually a little bit of work happening on the bottom hip so that your top side doesn't collapse up and in. So there is a little work happening through the oblique inside. We're gonna float up to hip height. Here's my external rotation. So I'm pressing with my outer hip, and then I'm gonna allow for movement so my knee can drop and my foot can lift. And we'll just do a couple like this. So finding that external rotation, right? Identifying where does the movement come from? Got that hand here. It comes from here versus maybe here and my knee trying to do a lot of the work. You go slow if you need to figure out one direction. If it feels like, oh, this one's a little confusing to the brain, no problem. I'll just do one more each way. And then we're gonna flip all the way. Okay, so now I'm in turn in. Find that same spot you found. Little pulses up. And I want you to notice, is it my knee or is it my hip? It should feel pretty mean at this point. It should feel pretty spicy. So if you're like, oh no, then you found it. Just noticing what upper body maybe is trying to do to get out of it. Let's go for 3, 2, 1, and then take a little rest. Yeah, so it's like a very, give yourself the grace of knowing other stuff's gonna try to turn on when it gets hard or spicy, because our body doesn't want to do that. It's gonna try to avoid the work. So we'll do just a little extension to get some in. Let's go hands by the side. We'll do the other side after this. So here's your shoulder blade kind of awareness moment. I'm pressing down through the tops of my feet. Good bum is on. So I don't want to tuck my pelvis, but I want to keep my pelvis neutral. And you'll know if you're tucking, because you'll find that you have like a bit of a space underneath your hips. So energy through the legs, core's on. Hands are wider than the mat, but about shoulder-ish distance. I'm going to lift my ribs first, or shoulder blades first. Then I'm going to lift my ribs, and my head's going to be the last thing to come up. So just like what we played with standing, I'm in slight retraction to extend. If we let our shoulder blades round, we don't really get very much extension, right? You can feel it in like the low back and the neck pretty quickly. So shoulder blades, ribs, and sternum. I can use a little support in my arms to get up a little higher. Same sequence to roll down. Maybe we go up and we do a little float and then we lower back down. Great way to build strength. Typically, this is, of course, back work, right? We're doing back work for sure. Stronger glutes equals easier extension because we're more supported with glutes and abs. We want this to feel really even through the spine. So if it feels like, oh, it's just all in one spot, then give yourself more support because maybe you need the strength to keep the spinal articulation a little bit more even. Great way to build strength is lifting on the way down. Once you've done about 100 of these, you can gently, right, using our abs and our arms, press back and take a child's pose. So pushing the arms back, sinking towards the hip or hips towards the heels. And then you can switch yourself around here. So we're going to do that second side. If you want to use your yoga block, feel free to grab it for your head. I'm going to go sans yoga block here. Side 2 of our hip business. So bottom leg's bent, right? Little oblique. I've got my stack. So hip tends to like to open up to the ceiling. You want to make sure that that hip and rib cage is aligned. Then our abs work better. So it's kind of a bonus. I'm going to bring my front leg forward and turn the leg in. Find that spot in your hip where you've got thigh sliding into the hip socket, kind of right around that back pocket area. And then lift, hold for a beat, and lower. And so here's where we're building new neurological pathways, essentially. So we're going, okay, brain, fire here first. And within that realm of we don't want to grip, but we're acknowledging that the movement initiates from this place and that everything else is kind of soft in order to allow for the mobilization. Because when our body isn't sure how to lift it, we're really good at mimicking shapes and movements, but we'll just use anything. And that's when we start to get into kind of those less desirable mechanical pathways. And also why the body's so cool, because we're like, we can solve this literally millions of ways. And we'll just do one more like this, and then we'll take our rotations here. And fun to notice, like how do the sides feel differently, right? Just proprioceptively, what's the difference? So casual knee bend, pelvis, we're gonna check if it's tucked, we're gonna lengthen. Ear, a little body scan for what's going on everywhere else. Just floating up and down. So here's that side hip crease. And for a lot of us, this feels lower, like it should feel like there's more action here, but I'm reaching my tailbone away as I float the leg up. So there's a lot less maybe range or movement than we think. And allowing for movement. So my pelvis is staying stacked, but I'm allowing some movement to happen through my sits bones. Otherwise, I don't have much going on. So we're gonna float up on this next one, hip height. Here's that outer hip press for your external rotation. If you start to hike, right, that's my hip flexor trying to get involved to give me the illusion of external rotation. And then we're going to rotate in. And go nice and slow. Like I find this side for myself is a little bit cheatier. So I might take it a little slightly different tempo than I do my side that feels like it's maybe not cheating as much. And just notice, all right, what are go-to things for you? Maybe that tense right away. Like you're like, oh, shoulders all the time. As soon as I'm like trying to make something work, it's always those. So I'm just practicing kind of down regulating and getting the trust in the muscle that's working. So stay turned in, find that spot. Rather than my knee doing the work, it's my hip. And if your body doesn't love this, you might notice those bracers trying to turn on right now. You might also notice the thigh trying to turn out so that you can use a stronger muscle to do the work. Internal rotation is so important for all of us, right? Glute med, really important for balance, but that nice deep internal rotator is really good if you like run a lot, if you're a cyclist, you're doing a lot of lateral movement. And take a rest. Nice. Give that bum a little pat. So we're gonna come all the way onto our hands and knees. And we'll add a nice little mobilization here. So hands and knees, I'm gonna show facing you guys first. So I'm gonna do my right hand, but basically whatever my supporting hand is, it's gonna be my same shin that moves. So my right hand stays as my support. My right shin, and I'll kind of move this leg so you can see, my right shin is gonna pivot. As it pivots, I reach my left leg out. I'm gonna sweep my arm up and over by my ear. Really nice big side bend. And I can take that maybe like 1 or 2 times. I'm like, oh, that feels really nice. My left hand comes back in, I unpivot and I return. And then I'm gonna switch sides. Move this little cord here. So I pivot, sweep that leg out. So I've got stability, right? Lots of stability. I'm gonna reach up and over. I'm getting a really nice big side bend. I can bring that arm towards my ear. I'll circle like 1 or 2 times and then I'll come back down. We're just gonna do that a couple of times. If you wanna turn up the heat, and I'll show this more because I know it's a little bit of choreography, I can take my block and I can take my circles here. And what the block will do, and depending, this one's pretty light. If you've got a wood block, this is nice. It's gonna add more load to the arms. So you're gonna get a bigger stretch, but you're also stabilizing through your shoulder more. Just set that block down at the top of the mat and switch sides. If you don't have a block that's very heavy, this one's not super heavy, then you could do really small weight, 2 pounds or less maybe. And then on this next one, let's do this one more time on each side. Add a little rotation. So now I'm gonna look back, hit the springboard, and then I'm gonna come forward. And I'll do that twice. And then we'll return, try the other side. Really great way to start to load the shoulder without asking it to be in a full side plank. So if you're kind of in between your full side plank, good way to build it up. especially if you're recovering from any shoulder stuff. Okay, we're gonna go back to the first side. We're gonna stay. I'm a little more over my hip. I'm gonna shift, and I might have to actually bump my hand forward. I'm gonna shift. So I wanna shift enough, toes can be tucked or flexed, that I can lift this leg. So that's where you're gonna go, oh, I need to shift a little more. And then my arm can be up or maybe overhead, right, for a little more work. And I'm just gonna float this leg up and down. So hip stability, same nice balance action, outer hip, inner thigh, and then your shoulder bridge. So I'm pressing this hip forward versus sitting back. And we'll take just a couple more like this. Last 3, and 2, and 1. Nice. You can take one more big stretch on this side. Okay, as we switch to the other side, a couple other things we can add in here. So I'm shifting so that I've got enough of my weight that I can lift my leg. If I start sinking, can you find that same lat activity? So I'm finding that kind of under the armpit support, pushing out so I don't feel the top of my shoulder, but I feel that nice underneath action. And we'll go for about 3, and 2, and 1. And then nice big side bend, take a nice stretch here. You'll come back to center, cross your ankles. Nice, lots of one arm shoulder, sneaky business. Grab your block if you've got it. I'm gonna pop it in between the legs. We're gonna take a couple full roll up here with that idea of, can I find shoulders kind of away from ears without, crunching. We don't wanna lock, I wanna make that clear, but if shoulders right up, we're gonna see if we can relax those guys. Maybe starting with the legs bent. If this feels better for you in your low back, you can keep your legs bent the whole time. So right about here, can I lengthen? Sweeping the arms up to the ceiling, nodding the chin, squeeze that block, exhaling. You can always grab legs, you can always pull a TheraBand. Maybe we go for our full straight. Here's a great example of pelvis, right? So my tailbone's down as I roll back. Let's go for 6 of these. So feel free to move a little faster as I yak. And then here we go, I'm gonna roll up now, exhaling. And I'm gonna take my pelvis with me. Yeah, and try that a couple more times. Obviously, if we need to use the momentum, we can use the coordination of our arms and our breath. So I can go inhale and exhale as I press. So I'm kind of putting a little more weight. That's where those lats come into play a little bit more. Or I can go really tortuously slow. I can take my hands to my opposite shoulders. I put a little more load in my upper body. So it's a little bit more work on the abs to come up. You've got that block to give you a little more help. I could also try challenging with arms overhead. Longer lever, still arms back. Behind, you might find you like one more than the other. So maybe try the one that you don't like, as long as there's no pain. Because, if you're online, no one can see you fail. So it's a good place to try it. On this next one, we're gonna stay down and then just stretch, let your block kind of drop from your thigh, stretch into a big star shape, just like, fingers and toes, you can crunch those guys. We'll do a little ab business here. Make sure we do a lot of hips. Let's get the core a little more active. So imprint position, I've got that nice block. If I have it, I don't have to use it. How am I gonna get there? It's my core drawing my pelvis versus my back smashing. Squeeze that block, lift your heels, drag your toes to your bum, float those legs up. Hands are gonna reach up and back behind your head. All right, so I'm gonna think about the upper abs, right? That's my feature, obviously low core too, but we're gonna think, can I engage through the upper abs so that I don't feel like my chin or my neck is doing my crunch? And it's a nice exhale to lift. Legs are just kind of hanging out. If this is too much, you got a really nice ab workout right there. If this isn't enough, extend the legs out. So you have a couple options here. I'm gonna kind of show in the more basic sort of principal position. And we'll just do 2 more like this. And last one. And then bringing your arms, you can either keep them down behind the head, so your elbows are still behind the head, or you can go arms out to a T. We're gonna do a little twist. So coming back to a little mobilization of the torso, I'm letting the top knee lift, or top hip lift, so that the knees don't shift. And then I'm using my inner thighs, my outer hips to help my core bring the legs back up. And maybe you try a couple with the hands behind. It's a little harder when we take away surface area. So right arms to the ceiling in our twist is gonna be our hardest because it's a little harder to cheat. So kind of a fun variation to try. Let's just do one more each way here. Getting those obliques going. How are the upper abs? Are they participating too? And then maybe arms come down to the side for a little assistance, elbows bend for a little less, or arms to the ceiling. We're gonna take a double toe tap. So for this one, if you don't tap all the way down without losing your back, don't worry about it. Go as far as you can, thighs away, and then come back in, right? So that's totally fine too. So I'm doing my tap, and then I'm lifting. For this one, love and exhale. Inhale to come back up. Try a couple of these guys. If you want to challenge it, reverse your breath. We're gonna add now a little up. So here's where maybe arms down is gonna be helpful. Getting my triceps and my mid back active. I'm gonna hinge. So now it's my thighs coming closer to my torso. Bum lifts up a little and it lowers back down. Now this can get into the low back if we're using a lot of momentum and then we don't hold on to the control on the way down. So if you have to use a little momentum, challenge yourself to slow the roll back down. So a couple more like this, right? Eventually, it's cool if we can get it all the way, arms up. It's like your short spine or your rollover prep. So super deep core. We're gonna combine these two in a moment. So now we're gonna tap, we're gonna come back up, and we're gonna take our little roll. Exhale for both directions. Arms can be down. Exhale, inhale and exhale. Inhale and exhale. So kind of a nice little like rock and roll situation. But we want to make sure it's nice and controlled. So let's try two more like this. Last one. And then you can take that block out, give your legs a little hug, a little rock from side to side. So we're gonna try a roll up a couple times. You're gonna lengthen your right leg long. Let's do left leg first here. If this leg needs to be slightly bent, fine. Think about, your mobility. For this one, hands are gonna come behind your left thigh and I'm flexing my foot. So I'm gonna kick into my left leg. Got some glute and hamstring, and then you can feel where it's kind of pulling against your arms, right? So I'm gonna come into my crunch position, and then I'm gonna push on an exhale to come all the way up to seated. Now I'm gonna try to use that same energy. This leg can lengthen away, or it can stay pretty stable on the ground if it's bent. And I'm gonna try to push to slow my roll back down, right? So like a single leg roll up. I'm gonna inhale and exhale to push. I wanna find that posterior chain, and then I'm rolling down. So it maybe has like a little momentum. Here's the resistance. Try that one more time. Coming up. And I'm using my arms a little bit, right? So biceps are engaged. Try that on the other side. So I'll roll down here with that right leg. I'm gonna curl up. I can use, if this leg's lifting a lot, try pushing, getting that glute on. You might find there's a difference from side to side. We're usually a little bit asymmetrical. The more I can get into that posterior chain, it's gonna help not only with our roll-ups, but it helps keep our pelvis in neutral. We're gonna try this as a teaser variation. So if this is pretty challenging, stick with this version and switch sides each time so that you stay nice and even. We love that, so we don't have to do too much counting. If this feels good, option to play with your block. If block doesn't make it easier, you can also ditch the block, especially if getting the legs really close together is tricky. Block might make it a little harder. I'm gonna find my teaser. So I'm gonna roll back off my sits bones and bring my legs up. right? So shins can have a lot to do with kind of where my low back is. So find a place to hold the shins that feels pretty supportive. And I'm gonna push into my feet. I'm using my arms to roll down. Okay, so now I'm gonna see if I can reverse that. So I'm gonna curl up into my crunch. I'm gonna push with my feet. Think about like punching with your feet, almost like a swing activity, and I can come up. It's okay if my feet come down. We're gonna work towards a balance. So once I'm feeling pretty groovy here with my posterior chain, arms are helping. I could use momentum. I'm gonna try to see if I can stick my balance. Now, once this is feeling groovy, no hands, right? And a good way to do that is no hands on the way down to build the strength, hands on the way up. And then eventually you'll get no hands in either direction, right? If you're like, this is child's play, then full extension, right? You can keep your legs where they are in space. We can really turn it up if that's feeling super easy. But otherwise, see if you can get that posterior chain to activate. And we'll just do like one more like this. We'll meet up at the top. Hold for a moment. And then you can lower your legs, take that block out, and take a little windshield wiper. So again, you can do hands down if that is more agreeable. If your feet are really close, spread them out a little wider. So the more we can connect in with that posterior chain in general, really good to counter all the sitting, right, that we kind of have to do, unfortunately, in our modern world. But we can get it to work even when we're doing more of a concentric movement with our flexor system sort of in charge. And if that was gibberish, I hope you felt some hip mobility today. We're gonna do a figure 4 stretch. So 2 options for this one. If shoulders are toasted, feel free to lie down, or arms up, we're kind of pushing out. We're gonna cross one ankle, and then you can use your supporting foot and your arms. Here's that outer hip. We're still working it, pressing into that guy. And then try it here. You could also do this seated in a chair. What's kind of nice sometimes about doing it at a little side to side if that feels good. What's nice about doing this upright sometimes is when we're on the mat, we might not realize if we're hiking a hip or like doing a tiny little side bend or a twist or something. So what's nice is here you can really feel your sits bones. This range is pretty intense, right? This is past kind of where I'd be sitting. So that's where maybe just like grabbing a chair and doing it on this. And then we'll uncross here, give your legs a little wiggle. Obviously, if that doesn't feel good, or if knees are a little more sensitive and extreme flexion, take it on your back. Know that all these positions are available, and you can really feel, okay, I'm really even through my sits bones and I'm pressing with my outer hip versus maybe having my torso do a little bit of extra stuff. You can point the toes, crunch the toes. Get a couple of side to sides here if that feels good, if you just want to hang out and breathe. Kind of one of the cool things about Pilates or many other fitness or exercise kind of systems is there's multiple planes that we can do movement in. So if there's something going on, there's almost always a different plane we can jump into and get a good result. And then you can lengthen that leg out, give it a little shake. Let's take a couple cat-cows with our butterfly position. So we're gonna go feet together. You get to use your arms, adjust your distance to what feels kind of the most comfortable here. Holding onto my ankles. I'm sitting up as tall as I can. Maybe I'm sitting on a cushion if I need. I'm gonna roll back and I'm gonna look towards my belly button, tuck my chin and get a nice stretch. So I'm kind of hanging on my own ankles. And then I'm gonna roll forward, bend my elbows, lift my chest. Nice little extension. Here's that same piece we played with at the very beginning of class. So rounding the shoulder blades. Right, and we can have slouchy posture and we can still really need this stretch. So it's not a bad thing to work our protraction too. And mobilization is really important. Good for our nervous system, good for info, for proprioception, good for setting goals. And we'll just do one more like this. Last one. Nice. All right. I will leave you there for today.